Hi, everybody. My name is Paula Price. Welcome. This is a webinar about COVID career disruption, short-term strategies, long-term resilience. We've got Cleo Kirkland, the managing partner of Korn Ferry in Toronto and Montreal, joining us today. And we have Eric Pye. He is the the Student Services Advisor at the Canadian Professional Legal Education Centre for Professional Legal Education. And we are going to be talking about a number of things today. So this is a session that has been created in recognition that this is a challenging time for students. And we are hoping to give you some tools that you can use for the beginning stages of your career in terms of job searching strategies, networking, and that sort of thing. And we'd also like to share some stories about overcoming disruption and challenges, and our speakers will be able to tell you more about that. What you can expect today, the presentation will be about an hour long. The first 45 minutes will be a panel Q&A style presentation where Cleo and Eric will be answering some questions about their experience and about their tips that they have for you. And then we'll have a few minutes at the end for live questions for members of the audience. If you probably are already familiar with Zoom. It's a few months in, but if you're not familiar with Zoom, your toolbar has a couple of functions that you may be using. One is the Q&A. So if you'd like to ask questions, I would encourage you to do so. The Q&A button is on the toolbar. You can upvote questions that you like, and the ones that get the most votes will go to the top. Those are the ones we'll answer first. You can also submit your questions anonymously. There's also a chat function. I will likely not be keeping an eye on the chat function, but you're welcome to go there for comments or anything like that. Before we begin the substance of the presentation, I would like to acknowledge, first of all, acknowledge the land on which I'm broadcasting. I'm in Vancouver, Canada. Vancouver, BC is the unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, and that's made up of the Musqueam First Nation, the Squamish Nation, and the people of the Tsleil-Waututh Nation. I'd also like to thank our speakers, Cleo Kirkland, who I'll be introducing in a moment, and Eric Pye, who I will also be introducing. And I'd also like to acknowledge everybody who is here today. So we have a number of law students who are joining us from across Canada. We have law school career advisors who have joined, lawyers, and just wanted to say thank you for joining us today. We know that this is a period of uncertainty. A lot has changed. For students who are in the middle of their summer programs, they're doing that remotely. That poses its own unique set of challenges. Students who are articling or who are looking for articling positions, again, a new set of challenges. And there are students in their first year of university or the first year of law school who, or just finished their first year of law school, who are contemplating the recruitment process. And of course, that has also changed as well. So, you know, we're hoping that you walk away from the hour with some ideas, some inspiration, and some tools that you can start acting on. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Cleo Kirkland. Cleo is the managing partner of Korn Ferry in Toronto and Montreal. Cleo started as a commercial litigator back in the early 2000s, and she did that for about 4 years on Bay Street before moving into the recruitment field. And so she started in legal recruitment, and she still does that, but she's now moved to Korn Ferry, which is a global consulting firm. Cleo and I were roommates in law school, and some of my fondest memories are of us studying for exams, and I realized in preparing today that that would be a whole other webinar, but one we'll have to do another day. So welcome, Cleo. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much. Good to be here.
Thank you. And Eric, Eric and I connected more recently. We met on LinkedIn. He recently joined CPLED, the Canadian Centre for Professional Legal Education, which is a not-for-profit organization that basically helps with the training of young lawyers or students to prepare them for being admitted to the bars in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Nova Scotia. Before joining CPLED, Eric spent about 8 years advising accountants through the CPA. And he has a wealth of experience for job seekers. He has some amazing resources that he shared with me that, I'm so sorry, I didn't put your slide up. Eric, some amazing resources. And I think he just has some amazing, amazing tools and strategies that he can share with us. So we're going to move into the Q&A. I'm just going to bring this so that we're all on the same screen. So Cleo, we're going to start with you. You're the managing partner of the 2 major Canadian offices of a global consulting firm. Can you please tell us what that looks like?
Yep, absolutely. So my job is multifaceted, and I will preface my answer with the fact that I took over as managing partner in November. So I'm new to that role, and so much has changed in the months since then. So I still have my day job, which is my practice, and as you mentioned earlier, I started as a legal recruiter, and half of my practice is still in the legal sphere. So I do a lot of in-house work, general counsel, AGC work. I've moved into compliance as well. And a lot of my time is still spent with law firms, and that is multifaceted. So I do a lot of lateral partner recruitment. I still do some associate work, although I tend to have people internally here that I work with on that. Infrastructure work, so I've done 6 law firm CFO searches in the last 3 years. I think I must be a glutton for punishment, as well as leadership succession. So managing partner turnovers, where there is, they need help kind of assessing internal talent in terms of who will ascend the ranks and lead the firm in a particular capacity. So I joined Korn Ferry in 2013 as a senior associate, and I've had a pretty good run here. I became a principal in 2015, a senior client partner in 2017, and then the managing partner in 2019. And the management piece, as I said, is new to me. So there are 258 people between the Toronto and Montreal offices. I am in the executive search part of Korn Ferry, but we do have 3 lines of business. So we have a business called professional search, which is really our mid-level search, and that is where the associate work I mentioned tends to be handled. Think of that as compensation between 100 to 300. So people who are professionals who are coming online, who are rising the ranks, and then the executive search tends to be the vice president level and up. The third part of our business, which is actually the biggest part of our business, is the advisory business, and that covers succession planning, high potential coaching, top team effectiveness. We have a huge and growing diversity and inclusion practice, an executive pay and governance practice. So it's a consulting firm that is really focused on all things people and talent related. My job is one of communication. We're a global publicly traded company. So in terms of the high level strategy, that is settled in Los Angeles, but I am tasked with sort of rolling that out in my 2 offices. I do a lot of work around recruitment and retention. Unfortunately, over the last few months, we've also done work around right-sizing the business to sort of confront the new realities of the market. But it is, no day looks like the day before. It is a mix of client work and internal-facing work. It's a very busy job.
Wow, it sounds incredible. And Cleo, it's so interesting because you've got so much experience in terms of not just your own career progression, but also being a window into multiple organizations, a lot of law firms, seeing how the infrastructure evolves, how individuals thrive in the different environments. So I'm so glad to have you here, Cleo, and really interested in hearing your perspective. So I'm going to ask you a little bit more about your transition. You started as a commercial litigator, and you are now doing this multifaceted role that's quite different, I would say, from the days of going to court. So how did that happen for you? How did you evolve from one stage to the next?
So I was in my 4th year of practicing at a big firm. It was what I thought I always wanted to do. And I knew early on there were signs that this was not a perfect fit, but I was stubborn and determined. But by 4th year, I had really satisfied myself that being at a big firm was not a good fit. I could sort of force fit it, but it was not an environment in which I was necessarily thriving. So I went to see, like all associates who are having these questions, I went to see a recruiter about moving in-house. And I had a very odd hour-long discussion with a legal recruiter. And I thought, well, this guy's not asking me the right questions at all. And at the end of that, he said, oh, well, you should go into search, or you should go into legal recruitment. And it was, I wish I could say my career was more planful. It was nothing I had thought of before. And it took about a year before I got comfortable with the idea, not only of leaving a firm, but of leaving the practice of law altogether. But I did, and I really haven't looked back. So that was in 2008, 2009. I, at the time, had a 6-month-old when I made the transition. So there was a confluence of events, but it did seem like the right time. As you said, I spent 4.5 years at a legal recruitment boutique, cutting my teeth on search. It was a mostly contingent shop, a lot of associate work and more junior in-house work. Again, not super strategic on my part, but I met a partner at Korn Ferry in a spin class who suggested that we have coffee, and one thing led to the next, and I landed here in December of 2013. So, and I know we're going to get into the advice portion later, but I think being open to possibilities and being willing to pivot off your initial career plan, for me, have been really critical.
So incredible, Cleo. And I love that this sparked just showing how serendipitous it is, right? How one conversation sparks the next, and how somebody that you meet at a spin class becomes somebody who then it has such a large influence on your career direction. So I have so many questions, but I'm going to try to focus on the ones that I told you I would ask you. One of the reasons, Cleo, that I really was excited that you're speaking today is that you had your own career disruption back in 2002. And maybe I will introduce it and let you tell the story. But in 2002, Cleo's firm that she was summering, we were both summering, we were summering on Bay Street, and Cleo's firm overnight literally kind of evaporated, and that was where you were supposed to be doing your articles. And so can you please tell us what happened and how you overcame that?
Yeah, I mean, it was an early curveball that in retrospect I'm grateful it happened. At the time it was pretty awful. So like Paula, I went through the on-campus interview process at McGill, which is where we were both at law school. We both got jobs. We very excitedly came to Toronto, and I got a job with a firm called Donahue, Ernst & Young, which was essentially the in-house law firm of Ernst & Young. And between the time when I accepted the role and when we showed up for work, the whole Enron debacle had unfolded, and there was a thought that law and accounting should not mix. And so when we showed up on the first day, there were partners who were moving their practices, and over the course of that summer, the firm did in fact dissolve. So it was, I think there were 12 of us at the firm. We bonded over this experience, but it was really nerve-wracking because once you get that job, you know, certainly I thought, okay, well, I've got the next couple of years sorted out. I need to work hard and show up, but there are a lot of open questions that I had during law school that had been answered, and that sort of overnight changed. So the 12 of us were left having to get back into that process that happens at the end of August, or it did then. But by that point, you know, 90% of the jobs at the big firms had been taken. And you know, I think we had all convinced ourselves that these are jobs that we needed to have, and it was really important. And It was extremely stressful because every firm picked up one, maybe two people. So it was an extraordinarily competitive process. It was nerve-wracking. We did all land, not at big firms, but we did all land. I personally ended up at Aird & Burles. I was lucky enough to get hired back. I practiced litigation there for 2 years, and then I moved to Macmillan and practiced there for another couple of years before I ultimately opted to move into legal recruitment.
Good for you. And how did you do that? Like when you learned that the firm was no longer there, what did you do to find your placement at Aird & Burles?
Yeah, a number of different things. And I would say my career coach at law school, or career counselor, I reached back out to, the professional development director at Donahue. There were certain people that it seemed to me were in a position to help, and I made a point of trying to build a relationship there. Friends at other firms, I would stay close to them to find out if there were, what the potential was that at the end of the summer their firm would have additional needs. I mean, there are designated people at every firm, and without being stalkerish, you want to stay top of mind. And we were talking about this before we got on the call. It was an interesting dynamic because it was the first office job, other than working as a terrible receptionist for my father, the first office job I had ever had. And so knowing how to approach these people, to pick up the phone, to write an email, what to say, what the tone was, how often to follow up. I felt in some ways we were sort of learning from scratch. We didn't have a lot of experience doing that. But I would say, personally, I erred on the side of following up and being present and, making myself available whenever it was convenient for other people. So it was a lot of tenacity. And just being willing to put myself out there, which at the time was not a natural thing. I was not an outgoing person. I'm still not. And it's exhausting. The job search it's not a fun process. And I think I had to pivot mentally. As I said, I had in my head that this had all been settled, and to sort of change your framework and think, okay, well, now I have to make a plan and put myself out there. I found making that shift mentally was a hard thing to do, and it needed to be done quickly.
Absolutely, Cleo, and that's so compelling. I mean, it sounds like you were doing all things, like you were reaching out to, and I'll just sort of recap because this may be really helpful for people who are going through this, but looking for people who are in a position to help you. You were talking about the professional development, talent management professional that was at your firm. The law school had the career services advisor. It sounds like you were just reaching out to everybody in your community, doing that work, doing the emails, the phone calls, the follow-ups. And like you said, it can be such an exhausting process, but here you are on the other side of it, and well on the other side of it. But by the end of the summer, I believe you had found your position at Aird & Burles.
Yep.
Good for you. I think you've already started to touch on this, but what did you learn from going through that experience?
I learned a few things. I would say, and I think lawyers in general tend to be a risk-averse population, and humans love certainty. And I think maybe it was never the case, and I don't have any lawyers in my family, but when I started law school, I believed that it was a very certain path. If you did X, Y would happen, and you just need to, do good work and keep your head down. And I think that can actually be quite self-defeating. So the two words that come to mind and early skills that I developed were agility and resilience. And so on the agility piece, we all have ideas about what we're going to be when we grow up, or what a law degree will look like. And you and I are now more years out of law school than I care to count. But when you reflect on the people that we went to law school with, very few of them are partners at big full-service law firms. I mean, there absolutely are some, but most of us are not. And so at a certain point, there was a pivot, and sometimes you pivot by choice because something is just not working for you. And other times, circumstances change and you are left with no choice. But I think the more you can embrace the idea that this will happen in your career, and likely more than once, the better off you'll be. And then the resilience piece, I think, you know, and the story about Donahue was not the only time in my career that I felt knocked around. And, you know, moments where you don't know where you're going to go or how it's going to work. But I say the more challenges like that I have had, the more I can recognize them for what they are when they happen, put them in context, and pretty quickly, you know, put one foot in front of the other and carry on. So I think those are pretty high-level takeaways. But for me, those were two very key, very important early learnings.
Yeah, and it's so interesting, Cleo. And do you have? I mean, you mentioned, and I love this idea that it's not the only time that you're going to get knocked around, and that's true. That's life, right? You have challenges that come up, and you need to deal with them. So, how have you found that initial experience kind of helped you with developing a process or a system or a strategy for when that happens?
Yeah, I think it gave me some early practice in internal fortitude. I think the other thing it did was very early on, it made my experience different than those of my classmates and peers. And I think in addition to being risk averse, lawyers have a terrible habit of looking over their shoulders and comparing themselves to their peers, their classmates, where they thought they would be. And that can just be really unhelpful. And there will be, in most of our careers, there will be turns in the road. There will be places when you feel like you're stalling. There will be other periods where you're leapfrogging ahead. And it is a bit, you know, you have so much control over this, and some things are simply out of your hands. And so embracing the journey, listening to the universe, being willing to pivot if things change, I think all of those, I would give you all that advice. I think it, you know, whether you like it or not, it's likely going to happen in your careers. So sort of learning to smooth out the bumps, developing your own dialogue and internal sense of fortitude and purpose, and really being plugged into what you like to do and what is working. And often in early jobs, you know, it's a bit of both, but trying to force fit something that you recognize at a certain point is not the highest and best use of your time and efforts, or it feels like more effort than it ought to be. I think you got to give yourself permission to make a change.
Such great insights, Cleo, especially like that one about it's not always going to be one way, right? That there are going to be times, as you said, where you're leapfrogging ahead and everything is going so smoothly. And then there are these other times where it's just not, it's rocky, it's shaky. And that over the course of time, we're all going to have a little bit of all of that. And to be okay with that, to accept it as part of growth. Cleo, so if you were, you know, to time travel, what advice would you give yourself, your cohorts, you know, facing that challenge back in 2002?
I hesitate to say this because when people said it to me when I was younger in my career and in the midst of adversity, it really annoyed me. But things do happen for a reason. I really, and it does not feel that way when you're under the wheel of the bus or you feel pinched. But I think, you know, it's what older people say because it's something that does come with experience. And I really have been in places professionally that have been rotten. And you know, as I said, Donahue is one of several examples. But all of those things typically steer you in a better direction. You know, not catastrophizing, doing what you know you need to, being patient with yourself, being consistent in your efforts, both at work and in looking for work. And as I said before, being willing to make a change, you know, betting on yourself. Careers are long. And in some cases, you need to take a step back or a half step back in order to take 5 steps forward.
Thank you so much, Cleo. So many great nuggets of advice, wisdom, and so much appreciate the benefit of your experience um, and just highlighting how the journey of a career is such a nuanced path. And like you said, sometimes you just have to be open to doing something new, trying something that maybe it wasn't on your checklist, but it's
Mm-hmm.
the right thing to do. And you may not know that when you make the decision at the time, but in hindsight, you may then see what the reason was, or how the paths all fit together. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my only other comment, and I know articling is a focus for many of the people on this call, and getting licensed is important, but I would just step back and acknowledge how phenomenal an education law school is and how versatile that degree is. And now being in the world of executive search, I have a law degree. I didn't need one to do this job, but when I look at presidents and CEOs and chief operating officers and people who are doing all kinds of really amazing and interesting things who happen to have law degrees, some of whom practiced, some of whom did not. Understanding this is a challenging job market, and law schools have a way of funneling people towards law firms, and fair enough, but there really are, there's a huge range of things that you can do with a law degree that are not readily obvious, or they're not going to come and set up a booth at your law school, but you're qualified to do.
Thank you so much, Cleo. That is such an excellent point. Totally agree. Eric, how are you?
Good. I've been enjoying listening to Cleo. It's been great.
She's got some wonderful pearls. So Eric, you have just recently joined CPLED. Can you please tell us a little bit about what you do there?
Right now, I don't do very much. I'm learning. But I was hired to help prep students. Prep is the name of the preparation course that we deliver for the 4 provinces that you mentioned earlier. That course is a requirement to pass the bar now in those 4 provinces. So you have to complete prep and you have to do your articles. And once you have those 2, you're eligible to pass the bar. So my job is to help prep students who don't yet have articles. So be that by helping with the resumes or with networking strategies or preparing for interviews. I like to think of myself as somebody who's going to teach those people how to fish. And then, once I expand my network within the legal community, then hopefully we'll get to the point where recruiters perhaps are coming to me and saying, we're looking for somebody off cycle. Do you have anybody on your books that is like this, or can you send me some candidates, or whatever the case may be.
Excellent. And Eric, before we sort of jump into the work that you're doing with students, advice for students, I just wanted to highlight that you have transitioned mid-pandemic. You joined CPLED in June, and so I imagine there were some interviews that preceded that online, that you've been onboarding in a virtual context. What can you tell us about that process?
So you'll find out that I'm a huge fan of networking, and so that's what I'll be talking about a lot later on when you're questioning me. I didn't have an interview for my job. I didn't apply for my job. The person who is the CEO of CPLED was the CEO at CMA Alberta when I first started working with accountants. This is back before CPA was created. In my previous role, I was the manager of student services, and I never really wanted to be a manager. I don't like long-term project planning. I don't like budgeting. I don't like Excel spreadsheets. I don't like any of that stuff. But where I was working, they managed over 3 years to convince me to take the manager role. And in January of this year, I was in the midst of budget planning and business planning and thinking, God, I hate this. And so I just reached out to Kara, who's my CEO, and I said, hey, if you're looking for a career advisor, I think I might know a guy, very speculatively, because I didn't think that they were big enough or far enough along their road of developing CPLED to be thinking about something like that. And then in March, she contacted me and said, Eric, I think we should have a coffee. And during that coffee, she told me about her plans and the fact that she was thinking about hiring somebody to work with students. And then probably about a week later, we went into COVID lockdown, and I thought nothing really more of it and continued working where I was. And then at the beginning of April, I got a call from HR at the Law Society of Alberta saying, we'd like to talk to you. And I thought, well, maybe they're going to, do a phone interview just to kind of like feel things out. And as it worked out, when we got on the phone, they were offering me a job. And so boom, I had a new job. In terms of onboarding, it's been pretty seamless. Kara, who I work for, she's got a small team of 10. 5 of those people, including myself, are people that worked at CMA. So half of the team are people that I know already. But one of the things that I have found is that they've been really, really good. I think there's a heightened awareness of the need to be really welcoming and the need to include people and so on. So very quickly there were Zoom meetings set up where I would have one-on-ones to meet and greet with the other members on the team that I didn't know, to meet other people within the Law Society. And then from there, I started to meet people outside of the Law Society, but in the legal community.
Fabulous. Such an interesting story, and yet another example of how taking that initiative, putting your name out there, planting the seed was ultimately what led to the jobs that you're currently in. So another nugget for students and job seekers who are looking for that.
Yeah, and I wanted to, when Cleo was talking about the serendipity of the spin class and meeting the Korn Ferry person there. I think there's a lot of people talk, oh well, this person was lucky or that person was lucky. I'm a great believer that nobody's really more lucky than anybody else, but people create the opportunities for luck to happen, and the best way to do that is to put yourself out there.
Absolutely. And Eric, you're doing that now. I mean, you have years of experience in the accounting field, so I imagine your network there is fully established, and now you're transitioning and entering a completely different market. We met on LinkedIn. I know you're out there networking. What can you tell us about what it's like for you to be networking in the legal community and building your relationships there?
It's been fun, and I think one of the big things about the whole networking thing is, I'm in the advantage of I'm not networking for work. And so when I approach people to meet with me, there's no pressure on them to provide me with anything other than their 2 ears and their 1 mouth. And, I'm going to ask them questions. They're going to give me advice. They're going to give me information. And so, I've met recruiters at the big firms in Alberta and Edmonton. I've met people who work at the law societies in the 4 different provinces that I'm working within. I've met career officers at all of the law schools in the jurisdictions that we are responsible for. I've met some recruiters at legal recruiting firms, so external recruiters, and nobody's really said no, and so again, this goes back to the whole networking thing. A lot of people, when they're networking, especially if they're networking for work, they make the networking about getting a job. And I think, if people are going to be afraid of networking, it's because they're making it about just the job. And so they're putting pressure on themselves to get a job out of a meeting, but they're also putting pressure on the other person to potentially provide a job. And if there is no job, then that person's going to say no, because there's no reason for a meeting. And so I think this whole attitude of having a purpose to your networking, having some curiosity, having things that you want to learn, and making these meetings about what those things are. And then also, thinking about the fact that the other person has to get something out of it as well. And so, what is it that I can offer in this meeting that is going to be of benefit to them, so that they aren't just giving me time, but they're actually going away with something that's useful to them too.
Fabulous. And Eric, how are you networking? Like, what are the channels that you're using?
Well, a lot of people are surprised when I tell them that I'm actually an introvert. I don't like cold calling. I don't like getting on the telephone with people. And so I've been using LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn is possibly the best tool in the world for introverts. It's a fantastic tool. You know, a lot of people think of it as, okay, it's my online resume, and I'm going to put my online resume up there, and you know, the recruiters are going to come, you know, jostling to my door, offering me positions. And I think that's possibly the least valuable part of that network. You know, the research that you can do on LinkedIn, you know, you can look up a firm, and you can find the firm, and you can look up, you know, who all the employees are at the firm who are on LinkedIn, and you can find somebody that is potentially, you know, a second-year associate, or a, you know, a junior manager or whatever. I'm still learning the lingo of what they call the people in firms, but you can find people who, you know, perhaps have something in common with you. Maybe they went to the same law school as you or whatever. And then you can, when you take a look at that person, you can see who your common connections are. And if there's somebody that you could potentially go to and say, hey, you know, I want to meet this person at this firm, would you be able to refer me, rather than cold calling that person or connecting with them out of the blue, where there's really no reason for them to talk with you because you're just a nobody. But you get that referral, you get that introduction, and now suddenly the people are much more willing to meet with you because, you know, they owe their buddy a favor or whatever. And so now you get a meeting that you otherwise wouldn't. You know, just the ability to learn stuff. You know, if you follow the different law firms, and you follow the different law societies, and you follow the bar associations, and there's articles being shared there all the time. And, you know, if you read an article that's interesting to you, you make a comment about it, and somebody else comments on your comment, and you get into a discussion with them. You know, the opportunity for you to publish long form articles. You know, so let's say there's been a legal decision made recently, like the Uber thing that happened a couple of weeks ago in Ontario. And it's like, well, you know, I want people to be impressed with my legal writing. I'm going to write a comment on the Uber thing that happened. And, you know, my connections are going to see it. And if they like it, they're going to like it, or they're going to comment on it. And then all of their connections are going to see it. And so this is really a way of getting your name out there, getting people to see who you are, to see that you're involved, to see what your thinking processes are. There's just so much there.
I love your description of LinkedIn, and I too am an introvert, and I love LinkedIn, maybe because I get a chance to see what everybody's up to. I can kind of hop in, hop out. You mentioned a number of things that you can do, like looking up an organization, seeing who's there, seeing where you have common connections, posting articles, commenting on other posts. I kind of look at LinkedIn as a social gathering, and where there should be an exchange of information. So I noticed, you know, it's nice to have posts of your own, but also to post other people's things and share other people's things, because it's relationship forming.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, the way that you and I met, you wrote an article, you wrote a piece on LinkedIn, I think, or it was some other piece that CPLED, the communications person there, shared. And I read that before I even started my job at CPLED. And I thought, oh, that looks like somebody who would be useful to get to know. And so I sent you a connection request and said, hey, I'm going to be working for CPLED, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And then we had a Zoom meeting, and now you're inviting me to be on a webinar. You know, these things just have a way of, you know, kind of like a snowball that starts at the top of the mountain and gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really enjoyed your webinar, which I'll send a link to it. One of the things that you said in your webinar, Eric, was this distinction between a warm, and I'm going to get the language wrong. There was the warm lead and then the cold contact, and you had much different language for it, but it was really neat because it was all about how people see you. And would you mind sharing that today? Just, I think it's a useful tip for people who are job seekers.
Sure. Well, I mean, the warm connections are the people who know you well, the people, you know, your best friends, your family, your uncles, your aunts, the people that you worked with before. And the really, really great thing about the warm connections is that they want to help you, right? They're the ones who are offering the support and so on and so forth. The thing well, I don't want to say I don't like it about them, but the problem with warm connections is that they have an idea in their head of who you are and what you will like and what you won't like. And so when you go to a warm connection for advice, they're going to edit what they give you based on what they know about you. So they may not throw out all the zany, wild ideas that, you know, they're thinking, oh, he would never like this. The cold connections are people that you've never met before. Perhaps they're loosely affiliated with your network. So, you know, these are the people that your father knows or your best friend knows. And these are people where, again, if you can get referred to them, because they don't know you, because they don't have any investment in you, they're just going to throw ideas out willy-nilly when you're having a meeting with them, because it's like, well, I'll just throw stuff out there, and if it sticks, it sticks, and if it doesn't, no harm, no foul, right? So, you know, I found this myself. So 9 years ago, I was laid off from my previous job before I started working with the accountants. I'd been in HR for longer than I'd like to think. And the first thing that I thought when I got laid off from that job was that I know I do not want to be in HR anymore. You know, I had no idea what I did want to do. But I figured, okay, I'm going to follow whatever connections I have, and I'm going to try to get them to introduce me to people. And I'm going to use my initial meetings to try to figure out what the heck it is that I want to do. And I think I had about 100 meetings in 3 months. And within those 100 meetings, the first thing I did was I closed the door on all of the things that I was thinking that I might want to do. And then I was at the point where it's like, okay, now I've got nothing. But I kept having the meetings, and slowly, this person, that person, I had a few people just saying, have you ever thought about career development? Have you ever thought about career advising? Have you ever thought about career coaching? And it was something I'd never thought about before, but you know, after I'd heard it a few times, I started thinking, you know, people keep mentioning this thing. Maybe I should really investigate it. And so then I started having a meeting with people in career development and finding out, you know, where can I take courses? Do I need to take courses? Where are the opportunities? And eventually, you know, I ended up where I was for 8 years. That wasn't part of what I had in my mind going into the whole thing. And it was very much meeting with cold connections, meeting with people I'd never met with before. They're the ones who gave all the ideas. And the funny thing was that once I got my job with CMA, very quickly, probably within about 2 or 3 weeks, I got calls from 4 of the people that I had met with through my networking experience, all of whom had internal positions at the companies that they worked with that they thought would be a perfect match for me. And you know, I had to say, well, I'm sorry, I found something now. But it kind of showed me that this kind of long-term strategy of networking for information, being able to get something about you out that people remembered, so that when opportunities come up 3, 4, 5 months down the road, they think back to you and say, you know, hey, that Eric guy, he would be a good person for this particular position. You just never know when that's going to happen.
Absolutely. And I like that you gave us that number. What was it, 100 meetings in the first 3 months? Is that
Yes.
And so it shows just how much, and Cleo, you talked about this as well, that it starts with you. It's who are you reaching out with? It's making those connections. It's keep going. It sounds like it's, especially for an introvert, that could be exhausting, but that's how you get your name out there. That's how you learn what it is that you're ultimately really interested in pursuing. And that's how you get on the radar of individuals who may at some point be able to reach back and say, hey, there's this opportunity. Are you interested? And that kind of leads to my next question for you, Eric, which is another point that you talked about, which is the hidden job market. And can you tell us a little bit about what that means?
So yeah, the hidden job market is all of those jobs that are never advertised. And I know that for students in law school, most of the jobs are advertised. You know, you've got your L1, your L2, your articling recruits that are very, very organized by the law schools and so on. But I think particularly when you get later into your career, but even for those recruits, you know, I was talking with a couple of recruiters in the last couple of weeks about off-cycle recruitment. And the fact that, you know, they may have hired all of their articling students for the year, and they may think that they're good to go until next summer when their next batch of students come in. And then suddenly they get a big job. You know, they get a case, they get something that is bigger than they can handle, and suddenly it's like, well, you know what, we need to hire 3 more people. And what we really need is we need 3 more contract articling students. They may not be full articles, but they'll be partial articles, and we need them yesterday, right? Those positions, they're never going to advertise them because they're going to have to go through Indeed or whatever hiring website, and then they're going to have to go through articles, and then they're going to have to do all this kind of stuff. What they're going to do is they're just going to reach out to some of the people who work at their firm and say, hey, do you know any students who are looking for work? And you know, whoever does get referred to them from somebody who's working for them already they're kind of pre-vetted already, right? You know, this is somebody who can speak for the character of the person that they're recommending. And it could be somebody that this person has only met once for a coffee. And so suddenly, you know, somebody who's looking for an articling position is getting a call from a law firm saying, hey, you know, I know you haven't applied for a job with us, but could you send me your resume? We're looking for an articling student and you've been recommended by Joe Smith. And, you know, suddenly a day later, they're sitting in an interview and there's no competition because there's, you know, the position was never advertised. There's only 2 people advertising for 2 people interviewing for 2 roles. You know, you got to screw up pretty bad to not get the role. And that's the hidden job market. And it's way less competitive and everything there happens through referral. And this is, again, the importance of having that network, having these people who know who you are. You know, you've heard the expression, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And I would say it's not even who you know, it's who knows what you know. And so if you've had meetings with people and they know a little bit about you, but they also know a little bit about your thought process and about, you know, what your interest areas in law are and all those kinds of things, those are the people who are going to be referring you on.
And Eric, it's such a great point, and yet it's a point where, I mean, I've had students reach out recently and they want to network, but they don't know how to network. They don't know what to say. They feel really uncomfortable about it. What would you recommend to students, young lawyers, about networking?
So I would go back to the point that I made about not doing it for the job, but doing it as a learning process. It takes the pressure off you. It takes the pressure off the person that you want to meet. So I'd say that's the first thing. The second thing, I've kind of mentioned this already as well, is go for a referral rather than approaching people cold, because that's always going to increase the chance that people are going to meet with you. Think about the networking as a long-term strategy, not as something that's going to get you a job tomorrow, particularly during COVID, where the opportunities that are out there right now are going to be minimal, but you could be networking right now, not for work, but for reconnaissance, to get intelligence on the market, and to set yourself up so that when things go back to normal, when things pick up again, you're on the top of a whole bunch of people's minds when they start thinking, hey, you know, we need to do an off-cycle recruit of articling students because we're short right now. We've suddenly got demand, and you know, we canceled all those articles, kind of thing. You know, have yourself ready to go there. Yeah, I would say those are some things to keep in mind.
Thank you.
Can I add my 2 cents?
Yes, please.
Yeah, jump in.
And I think Eric makes such a good point, but I think, and it's interesting that you've got 3 introverts talking about networking, but
Online.
I think networking should be something, and all of you are at the early stages of your career, but it should be an ever-present part of what you do. And there's a discipline to it. And, you know, Eric's comment about 100 conversations in 3 months. I personally, my networking now is more business development related, and I have hard metrics for myself every week. And they are, I reach out to 5 existing clients, 5 placed candidates, and 5 net new aspirational clients. And if I don't hold myself to that, it simply falls to the bottom of the list. So, and it, you know, it's not necessarily about getting a piece of work, but it is about building my profile. It's about staying in the market. It's about market intelligence. And, you know, networking is most effective when there's an exchange, where it's not simply, you know, what can you do for me? So meeting with people, and everyone has a perspective to share, where you have some bit of information that is helpful to the person with whom you are speaking. It may not be in that discussion, but it will make a mark. It will make them want to help you. And unfortunately, the sales cycle in many of these relationships is long. So you've got to go in without an expectation that you are going to get something out or that it's transactional. It's just about building the discipline with yourself, that it is just something that you do on an ongoing basis.
Very much so. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. I love that these numbers are getting put on the table, because it really does show how we need to stay on top of it. It's a process, it's a focus, and like you said, Cleo, holding yourself accountable. This is how we kind of develop that process. Eric, this has been extremely useful. We have 4 questions that are in the Q&A, and so what I'd like to do, because we're getting close to 1 o'clock, well, 1 o'clock my time, we're getting close to the top of the hour, so what I'll do is I'll ask the questions, and I think we'll be able to get through them. So I'll begin with the first one. It says, "Hi Eric, I liked your comment about making networking less about the job and more about genuine interest, so that both parties can get something out of the interaction. As a law student, what can we bring to the table that the other party can feel like they have received something as well?"
That's a good one. So I think it becomes easier once you have been networking for a while. And one of the things that I found, so just to back up, when I was networking 9 years ago, I'd only been in Calgary for about 3 years at that point. I'd been overseas for several years before that. And so my network was very, very small. And so I didn't feel like I had much to offer. But over the course of meeting more and more people, what started to happen was I would meet somebody who had a need that somebody else who I'd met before could fill. And so I started making introductions. And so I introduced a trainer to a university course designer. And that trainer ended up working there and teaching courses at the University of Calgary. I had worked in my previous job with somebody that had an automated way of doing competencies for performance reviewing, but also for promotion planning and so on. And then I was meeting with somebody from HR at Suncor who was talking about, we need to find a system that will do exactly what this guy did. And so I introduced them and they ended up working together. And so looking for those kinds of opportunities, always thinking about, who do I know? What can I offer there? But the other thing is you offer yourself, so don't be looking for the job, but be looking for what is it that they need? What is it that, where are the shortfalls on their team? Do I have skills that could be useful there? And thinking about that, because ultimately, yeah, you're trying to not make the meeting about getting a job, but in the back of your mind, it's about getting a job. So when you hear about opportunities to contribute, to offer yourself, I'd say there's nothing wrong with that either.
Yeah, I totally agree, Eric, and I would just add, it is tough when you're coming into the job market in terms of what you can offer, but I would say that lawyers in general take their obligations to the profession pretty seriously, and most people who have been at this in practice, or they are a lawyer, I mean, myself is a good example, I don't practice anymore, but when I am approached by young lawyers or law students who want advice, I'm very keen to help. And what sets some people apart from others are a few things. One is a genuine curiosity and wanting to learn and take in information, and also someone, and it's hard to know, you shouldn't can an answer in terms of what you want to do, but someone who's being really thoughtful about their own career. And I'm helpful in every case, but the more difficult and sort of clunky conversations is where people come and they really don't know, they're not thinking, they haven't done a lot of sort of pre-work in terms of how they're thinking about their own careers and where they want to go or what's worked or what hasn't worked. I think the more you can come to those discussions with a point of view about yourself and your own career, the more productive they will be.
Yeah, and the one thing I would add on top of that too is that And this is something, you know, when I used to meet people who I'd never met before, I'm a psychology major, and so I'm interested in why people do things. And I used to ask them, why did you agree to meet with me? And about half the people, it was, well, because, you know, the person that you got to refer you is a friend of mine and I owed them. But what surprised me was there's a lot of people who actually want to meet people and they want to help people. You know, perhaps they benefited from networking earlier in their career and this is a way for them to give back. The problem is that nobody ever asks them. And so by you asking them for a meeting, you're actually giving them an opportunity to do something that perhaps they would like to do, but don't get the opportunity to do.
Yeah. So great.
Yeah.
I'm delighted with this conversation. I'm really learning so much from both of you and really enjoying this. Thank you. I'm going to ask the next question, which is about, you know, once you've had that meeting, how often should you follow up and what should you say when you're following up? And Cleo, do you want to take this one? And then Eric, you can add your additional comments.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky question to answer because I think it is quite subjective in terms of, you know, what the purpose of the initial meeting was, if in fact there's a live opportunity. My advice is to be as attuned to the other person and follow up as often as seems appropriate to them, but also in the way that they want. And so I'm a little bit old school. I do like telephone. I still take it up. I know there are some people who prefer to communicate mainly by text, others it's emails, but in as much as you can communicate an awareness, a respect for their time, and a willingness to talk to them in the way and at the frequency that works for them, I think is optimal. And that's a bit of a non-answer, but I think it's probably the best one I can provide. I don't know, Eric, if you have other thoughts on that.
My only add would be, you know, add value with your follow-up. And so, you know, what did you learn from the original meeting and what have you done with it? You know, so one of the things I learned from you in the meeting was X, Y, Z. And because of that, I followed up with ABC. And now I've changed my career direction to this or to that or whatever, so that, you know, the person kind of gets the feeling that you have genuine gratitude, but that the meeting that they had with you added value to your life. And I think that's going to make them feel better about the whole thing. And to be willing to go back to the person afterwards and say, you know, based on our meeting, I've done this. This hasn't worked so well. Do you have any advice? Or, you know, turn it into a conversation rather than just, I'm going to send a thank you message every 2 weeks that's going to add no value to this person's life other than an additional email to read, you know?
Yeah. Such an interesting and great point. So I notice we're really at 1 o'clock. There are a few questions outstanding. Do you have time to maybe spend a couple more minutes on these, or should we wrap up?
I'm fine.
I'm good.
Okay, so anybody who needs to drop off, please do. Our gracious speakers will be here for a few more minutes, and we'll just take we'll just take the next 2 questions and then we'll conclude. So I'm a recent call who is looking for an associate position. I've sent my application to all big mid-sized firms, all of whom have told me they're not hiring. When I've reached out to legal recruiters or look into in-house positions, they require a minimum 1-year post-call experience. I've been networking extensively, but I'm not sure what else to do. Your advice is greatly appreciated. So Cleo, Eric, who would like to jump in first?
I'm going to defer to Cleo for this one.
Okay.
If that's okay.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not surprising. I do think most legal recruiters have a threshold in terms of candidates with whom they will work, and that's really largely driven more by the law firms than it is by the legal recruiters. But law firms want to see candidates from recruiters who have a certain amount of experience under their belts. I've been struck, and I do work in all the major markets across Canada, but I sit in Toronto and do most of my work here, how difficult it is to get my hands on an updated list of smaller firms. And, you know, the top 20, the top 30, it's so readily searchable, everybody applies there. And so I've come at this a few ways. One is if you know what practice area is of interest, and it could be more than one, a few, seek out boutiques that specialize in that practice area. Another option is to go to the big firms that you have applied to, or if you have friends at big firms, ask them where they refer their conflict work to. And if you can go deep in a particular practice area, you will get on to additional people. And there are firms, there are 2-people shops who take on articling students. So, if you draw the line at 50 lawyers, there's going to be a lot of the market that you are not tapping into. And I would also say, in terms of having those conversations where the answer is, we are not hiring, thank you very much. If you can take a few more minutes of that person's time or ask a follow-up question, well, I'm really interested in this. Do you happen to know anyone who practices in the area who may be hiring? I think you do need to expand the conversation with the people with whom you are speaking, because as Eric said, the people that they know can in some cases be, it's a more powerful network, and that's ultimately in many cases where you will find roles.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Cleo. It's such a great answer. I completely agree with this idea of being able to find the firms that aren't readily on the radar. There are firms out there, I speak from the perspective of the Vancouver market, but there are small boutique firms that are out there that are doing the same caliber of work, or, in the same, well, in some cases, the same caliber work as the larger firms, but they may not register on your average search. And being able to access those firms, those lawyers, they may have opportunities. They may not be on the same lockstep hiring processes as the larger law firms. They may have a bit more flexibility. They might be really busy. You never know. And so I think your point about getting behind the ones that you see first is where you're going to find opportunities that you just otherwise wouldn't find. So thank you for highlighting that.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that about the small firms too is that those are the ones that nobody else is looking at or applying to. And so again, that competition is lower.
Yeah, my only other comment, and I know there are people from all around the country here, but if you are flexible or more agnostic on where you are, and I mean Ontario, for instance, has many cities beyond Toronto. So if you look at Collingwood is thriving, Barrie, London, Ontario, Hamilton, Burlington, if you're willing to kind of, there are great firms in all of those markets that frankly have trouble attracting talent and finding the right people. So they're always happy to take phone calls.
Absolutely. Another great point. Thank you. And so I'm going to ask this one last question. There's another question about follow-up, but I think we've talked about follow-up. Eric, it was for you. What should I do after following up? Okay, I guess you will address it. What should I do after following up for a couple of times? Is it better to call?
Sorry?
This was, so what should I do after following up for a couple of times? Is it better to call after a couple of times?
Again, I think you need to think about what have you done for your follow-up. Has it just been 2 thank you notes with nothing to add, or has it been kind of something more in-depth or something a bit more meaningful? I think there are a few things you can do. One is to try a different mode of following up, and that goes to Cleo's point about follow up in a way that they would want to be followed up with, not the way that you would prefer to do it. So yeah, if you've been following up by email, then yeah, maybe a phone call is the way to go. The other thing is, if you got a meeting with somebody through a referral, perhaps go through the referral and say, hey, I had the meeting with so-and-so, I've been trying to connect with them again, but I haven't been able to get through. Is there anything way that you could maybe check for me and just see if they'd be, willing to answer a couple of questions or whatever the case may be? It sounds trite to say think outside the box, but yeah, try to do something different than you've been doing so far.
Okay, and so this is our last question, and then we're going to wrap up. I'll read it out. Thank you for sharing your experience, Cleo. I also have a little one right now. He's 2 years old. What would an NCA student do to find articling in the current stage, and considering we do not have many opportunities like JD students have?
Oh, I wish I had more information. I mean, I know the NCA students have added challenges, and I think, and I hope a lot of the advice that we've already covered on this call is helpful. I'm not sure, Eric, over and above that, if you have thoughts. Unfortunately, I don't.
Yeah, I think for the NCAs, because a lot of them haven't been involved in the campus recruitment cycles, it has to be a focus on the off-cycle recruitment. And perhaps it might be not going for an articling position, but going for a legal assistant or some way of getting your foot in the door with a firm where you can convince them of your value. The other thing I would say is go to the VI Recruit website and sign up as a student. You don't have to be going through the university to be able to access what is the calendar of applications, to be able to put in applications. You can actually join up on the on-cycle recruiting yourself without going through a career office.
Excellent. That's all really, really helpful.
Yeah.
So we are going to wrap up. I wanted to say thank you so much to both of you, to you, Cleo, to you, Eric, for joining today and for sharing so many amazing tips. I feel inspired, and I love just all the different ideas that you bring to the table, really focusing on the individuals and taking ownership and taking initiative, initiating those calls, making those calls, setting a schedule, following through, looking at the nature, the quality of your interactions, what you're bringing to the table, using LinkedIn as a resource, finding ways to expand your networks, and both of you sharing these stories of serendipitous opportunities that, I mean, it's co-created. It's not like they just came out of nowhere. It's pursuing the different path. It's making the connections. It's increasing your network. And it's just such an inspiring story from both of you. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you everybody who joined us. It's been such a pleasure. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Paula.
Yeah, my pleasure as well.
Thank you so much. So
bye, everyone.
bye Cleo, bye Eric, bye everybody.
Cheers.